I'm Marc Ramsey. I am so excited today to be talking to Ryan Holiday. Who is Ryan Holiday? Well, Ryan is the former director of marketing for American Apparel, where he sits right now. Through his marketing firm Brass Check, he's worked with authors like Tim Ferriss, Seth Godin, Marc, Ecko, and Tucker Max. He is, as I like to say, a devious genius when it comes to the art and science of media attention, which is putting it nicely.
Yes, thank you.
And he's the author of some of my favorite books from the past 3 years, including Trust Me, I'm Lying, The Obstacle is the Way, and the one we're talking about today that's coming out in an expanded version at the end of the month, Growth Hacker Marketing, a primer on the future of PR, marketing, and advertising. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin at the beginning with this book, okay? Explain to me what Growth Hacker Marketing is and what's new about it, why it matters.
Yeah, so it's interesting. For me, this all happened. I read an article about two and a half years ago by Andrew Chen, who's sort of a prominent advisor and Silicon Valley entrepreneur. And basically what he was saying is that in Silicon Valley, this idea of a growth hacker has replaced what we would consider as sort of the VP of marketing position. Now, this caught my attention because that was sort of my job, right? And what does it mean when someone, I think we've all seen blogs predicting the end of our jobs plenty of times and it went to nowhere, but I looked at the companies that sort of attributed their success to growth hacking. Facebook, Twitter, Airbnb, Dropbox. These are major billion-dollar brands that acquired hundreds of millions, billions of users in some case in a very short amount of time, doing none of the things that traditional marketers sort of pride themselves at being good at. And so the book is really an exploration of how that came to be, what it means, and what to do about it.
Okay, I want to ask you about some of the tactics that are involved in growth hacker marketing in a second, but it occurs to me that some of the companies you mentioned, not all of the companies you mentioned, are either primarily or exclusively digital entities.
Yeah,
and
sure.
To what degree is growth hacker marketing applicable to either a brick and mortar enterprise, or even in my case, a media company that reaches people's ears and eyes through radio or television?
Yeah, sure. I think there predominantly you see growth hacking happen in the tech space, but to me this is because it's a testing ground for a larger set of trends that are affecting all of us. And this has been true for all of media's history. I mean, look, the idea of a press release, which companies have now used for hundreds of years, was invented by government agents in World War I who were trying to update the media on events that were happening overseas, right? So, look, right now we're using a webcam, we're sort of using Skype, we're using all these models, things that were in many cases pioneered as business models by people in the pornography industry. So, technology usually is innovated in one space, and then it's if it Twitter happened with nerds, and then all of a sudden celebrities are using it. So what happens is this innovation happens in one space, and then it tends to trickle through the rest of culture if they share some sort of underlying economics. So I think the reality is where companies are launching with less money, with shorter runways, with fewer employees than they ever have before, and that's where these sort of lean marketing tactics come in.
And it's not just companies that are launching. We're ongoing companies, established companies also have short runways, right?
Totally. And the tools, the way in which they get those customers is now eminently more trackable and traceable than it was before. So if it's like, hey, if you're a national retailer and you're just hoping sales go up because you did some promotion, that's one thing. But if most of those sales are coming through a website, well, now you can start to see what's working and what's not working. And I think that's where a lot of these tech firms have created some innovations in terms of actually seeing what works, scaling what works, and evaluating mathematically or algorithmically rather than just on gut instincts or creative preference.
Okay, let's try and get specific just to give a couple of examples. But the idea of growth hacker marketing, growth hacking, is baking into the product virality, breaking into the product the marketing. Can you give me some examples of companies that have done that and how they've done it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most prominent ones, of course, that I talk a lot about in the book is Groupon and Living Social, which sort of built their model on customer acquisition through referral, right? So, if you would send the deal to 3 other people, it would be free for you. Or if one of your friends signed up based on a referral link, you got a $10 coupon. Dropbox did the same thing, but instead of paying you in cash, they paid you in free storage on the site. So if I use Dropbox and I send you a file on Dropbox, and then you sign up for the service, I get an extra 100 megabytes of space or a gigabyte of space. And so what it's essentially doing is saying, it's taking the idea of a network effect, which is that a network gets more valuable the more users that are on it, and saying, okay, we're going to give some of that value that's being created back to our customers. So I'm going to pay you to bring more people onto our service. And that's something that most marketers, I think, probably think is a little unsexy or a little, it sort of falls under the category of direct marketing, but if it works, it works.
Well, and that was one of my questions, which is how do you differentiate this from what people might call either direct response advertising, direct marketing?
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap. So I sort of see growth hacking as a combination of direct marketing, traditional marketing, and business development, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a great example. So Airbnb did this thing where they allowed, they created this hack that essentially allowed users to cross-post their listings on Craigslist, and they acquired all sorts of users this way. And it's this sort of classic growth hacking story. But then more recently, they decided that they would pay they would pay to have a professional photographer come photograph your house if you listed it on Airbnb. Now, this is not direct marketing, and it's not really traditional marketing. It's not really anything. But the purpose is to make the site look better, to give you something to talk about as a customer, and to make the average listing seem more attractive and therefore worth more money. So somebody on Airbnb saw, okay, look, listings with professional photos sell for 20% more. So if we as Airbnb can subsidize that process and then capture that value, that's good for us. And we're going to see that as a marketing decision, not as a product decision, or not as what department does that fall under, right? Mm-hmm. It's not, the programmers didn't make that decision. It's not really biz dev. What is it? It's all about growing the site at the end of the day. And that's where I think this idea of growth hacking comes in.
That's one of the points in your book too. This kind of division between product and marketing is a dated division, and now those two things just cross over all the time, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, Facebook made this decision pretty early on. They said, well, we're not going to have a marketing department. We're going to have a growth department. And the reason they said that is, I know that seems like a semantic difference, but if you think about it, what is a marketing department's job? It's to do marketing. Well, nobody wants to do marketing. You're doing marketing because it's a means to an end. So Facebook says, let's not dance around that. Let's have a company whose job it is to grow the business. Let's have a department whose job it is to acquire more users and grow the user base. We don't really care what they do, provided it meets that goal. And so that's sort of, in the military they have this concept of commander's intent, which is it doesn't matter. He's not saying go do this to take this hill. He's saying take this hill. And I think growth hacking sort of operates under that principle. Growth above all things.
Relating to that, there's a quote in your book. I want to read it to you and get you to comment. Deep down, I think anyone marketing or launching anything fantasizes that they are premiering a blockbuster movie.
Sure.
And this illusion shapes and warps every marketing decision we make. It feels good, but it's so very wrong.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everyone in marketing wants to be Don Draper, but Don Draper is a fictional character, and two, he's not really in marketing; he's in advertising, and he only creates his job is to create advertising campaigns. His job is not for those campaigns to be successful necessarily. He's not judged on any metrics. He's just an artist masquerading as a marketer, right? And so I talk about that in the book, is that, we tend to focus on what seems really cool and creative and makes us feel good about ourselves. Mm-hmm. We're not actually holding ourselves against many benchmarks and evaluating whether what we're doing and what we think looks cool actually succeeds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To what degree does growth hacker marketing substitute for mass media? Obviously, my audience, audio, radio. Yeah. To what degree does it substitute? To what degree does it complement? I'm going to assume that you're not suggesting that growth hacker marketing, yes, traditional advertising or marketing, no.
No, definitely not. Especially once you get to a certain size, right? Like, look, Google buys Super Bowl commercials now. Maybe Facebook will at some point. At a certain point, these traditional techniques make sense. And not only then, what it's really about is looking for the things that nobody else in your particular space is doing, or undervalued assets on the market. So social media happened to be how a lot of these companies grew very quickly, but now that's a very crowded space, and maybe billboards are undervalued on the market now, or radio ads are undervalued on the market now, and that's what you want to look at. So I suppose it really depends on specifically what you're doing, and more importantly, what all your competitors are doing, because you should not do that.
Well, let's explore that a little bit, because certainly in the radio space and the audio space, so much of advertising is about reach. And I wonder, reach, not necessarily attention, not necessarily engagement, but the subtitle of your book is the future of PR, marketing, and advertising.
Right.
Where do you see the future of advertising in this era of where radio, for example, is pushing reach to the exclusion of these other more trackable metrics?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when you look at advertising and how many of the metrics that people use to judge how many of the metrics that people throw around are just totally worthless or unverifiable. So it'll say like, oh, you want to buy on this television station. It's like, we're in 200 million homes. And it's like, yeah, but 200,000 people watch your channel. Like, so this is just a made up, like, the growth hackers talk about vanity metrics all the time, and reach can be a vanity metric, right? You're just looking for sheer size, but you're not actually evaluating whether it's working or not. So it's less about reach and ultimately about what that reach is converting into, right? So it's like, if you told me I could reach 2 million people and I would capture 1% of them, or you told me I would reach, a much smaller number of people but capture a much higher percentage, what ultimately matters is what that conversion rate amounts to, right? So, I talk about this in the book. Everyone wants to be the front page of the New York Times. When that might sell, like if I'm working on a book, someone wants to be, on the New York Times, and that might sell 200 copies, and then being on some tiny blog like Tim Ferriss's blog, comparatively, might sell 2,000 copies. And so it's really, at the end of the day, about putting asses in seats, right? And if you're not doing that, reach is just a vanity metric.
So ultimately, it's got to be more, there have to be some metrics which are at the bottom of the funnel, not simply the top of the funnel, right?
Yeah, totally. And we can get very focused on having the top of the funnel being as large as numerically possible. And then we kind of think that it's somebody else's job to ultimately convert that into something, right? Like, I'm just the buyer, right? So I don't care if it converts into sales. I don't make the website. It's not my job if it doesn't, generate, if the traffic I send to it isn't going anywhere.
But Ryan, isn't this actually one of the problems, that the buyer, in fact, doesn't care? In fact, that's not the buyer's job?
Yeah, totally. And it's especially true when you hire outside agencies, right? I think one of the differences between a marketer and a growth hacker is a growth hacker usually works at the company they're doing this at, right? They are not some external firm. And so I think it's really interesting that, we all agree that marketing is very important and that communicating with our customers is very important. And then the first thing we do is pay someone who doesn't work for our company to do it for us, Outsourcing, it's like, look, okay, you don't manufacture your own product, you don't design your own creative, you don't buy your own advertising. What is it exactly that you do? Hey, so it seems to me that marketing, if there's one thing you're going to bring in-house, it should be these marketing efforts.
All right, a couple of final questions, because I know you have to go.
Yeah.
One is, can you give me, virality is at the heart of growth hacking. Can you give me a couple of tips on things a marketer should do to build in that virality?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the first part is just empathy, right? Would you share this yourself? And most of the time, I don't think people actually bother to think about that. They make some video and then go, oh, this is a viral video. And then you ask, like, okay, look, would you put this on your own Facebook account? Probably not, right? So it's not really a viral video. And then two, it's looking at what are the actual mechanisms to make this thing spread. Are you just hoping that you made this thing and it's going to be so good and so compelling that people are going to get over any obstacle to share it? Or have you facilitated that and made that easier? And that's what those referral programs we were talking about do earlier, is they create extra incentives on top of it. I'm not going to refer a crappy deal to my friend, but if the deal is good and you're incentivizing me to do it, I'm just not, there's no way I'm going to say no to that. So those are two things to think about.
Okay. Final question. You're kind of famous for some breakthrough ideas in PR, some controversial, some just, frankly brilliant. And I wonder, where do these ideas come from? What's your process for getting to those destinations?
Yeah, I mean, look, I wish that was a bit more systematic because then I could recreate it and teach it to people and they could do it for me. But I don't know. It's about looking at what I tend to think about is like, okay, we've got this product in front of us, and there's something about it that's interesting. Well, what is the most interesting thing about that part, and how can we emphasize and exaggerate and focus exclusively on that part? So when I'm dealing with controversial clients, it's like, how do we sort of exaggerate and amplify that controversialness? If I'm dealing with something that's surprising or counterintuitive or funny, it's about exaggerating and emphasizing those things. I think people try to be everything to everyone, and then they wonder why it ultimately ends up being nothing to nobody.
Great answer. Ryan Holiday is the author of Growth Hacker Marketing, a primer on the future of PR marketing and advertising. If you do not buy this book, you're out of your mind. I simply can't recommend it strongly enough. Ryan, thank you for writing the book, and thanks for being with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.